Welcome to Chopping Board Economics, where cooking brings economics alive. I'm Peter Ormosi from the University of East Anglia. Join me for an episode of Everyday Economics, explained through some of my favourite recipes. Hi, today we're going to make an apple strudel. Vienna is the birthplace of strudel, but thanks to the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, it became a fundamental part of all cuisines that were once part of the empire. It is one of my favourite desserts, and you'll be pleased to learn that it's fairly easy to make. Making a strudel is also giving us a chance to find out what the chopping board economist has to say about the sugar tax, something that will be introduced in the UK in 2018. Worldwide, an estimated 39% of adults are overweight or obese. In the UK, the same figure is a staggering 60%. This has serious health implications. For example, people who consume at least 1 to 2 cans of sugary drinks a day have a much increased risk of developing diabetes. Today in the UK, there are around 3.6 million people diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. This is a 20% increase from 2012. Obesity is also a major risk factor for heart diseases, cancers, and other diseases. It appears obvious that we'd be better off if we could turn these numbers around. So why sugar? On average, sugar makes up around 11 to 15% of the total calorie intake in the UK, and the number one source of sugar intake is sugary soft drinks. The average UK person drinks more than 200 litres of soft drinks a year. A regular can of Coke contains around 35 grams or 7 teaspoons of sugar, and Coke isn't even the worst in this respect. Moreover, obesity and wealth are also linked. At age 5, 6.6% of the children from the poorest families are obese, while the same figure for the richest is just 3.5%. By age 11, the gap widens to 7.9% of the poorest and only 2.9% of the richest. These are worrying numbers. Sugar seems to play a central role in our life, so reducing its consumption sounds easier said than done. Not least because evolutionarily we are hardwired to like sugar, and this strudel recipe is a delicious example why. An apple strudel doesn't require a lot of ingredients. I'm using a package of phyllo pastry, around 800 grams of Bramley apples, 50 grams of sugar, and 100 grams of baking butter. I'm also going to need some breadcrumbs, raisins, and cinnamon. Now let's see what these ingredients mean in terms of their sugar content. The apples contain around 70 grams of sugar, plus we're adding another 50 grams, and the raisins also contain around 10 grams. That's 130 grams of sugar, or a litre of Mountain Dew, or a bit more than a litre of Pepsi. So what's the economic impact of consuming so much sugar on a regular basis? The UK government estimates that obesity and being overweight cost around £27 billion a year to the UK economy through healthcare costs, reduced productivity, reduced social mobility, and so on. This isn't a unique type problem. In many instances, when we enjoy something, it might impose a cost on somebody else who wouldn't have chosen to incur this cost. Economists call this an externality, because the person who causes the cost to society isn't paying for it. He or she has no incentive to reduce this cost. So what do we do about this externality? A less frequently used solution would see a negotiation between those who generate and those who suffer these costs. For example, producers of sugary drinks could negotiate with the Department of Health to pay for obesity-related treatment costs. This might also trigger them to reduce sugar content to avoid having to pay for these costs. A different, and by far the most common response, is to impose a tax on those who generate the extra cost to society. In the UK, to alleviate sugar consumption, an excise tax is going to be imposed on the production of sugary soft drinks. The idea is to reduce the amount of sugar that producers put in drinks. Will it work in reducing consumption? It might do, but here I want to highlight some of the less expected consequences. Now imagine that tax is imposed on cake production as well. The idea is to get cake manufacturers to use less sugar. Today I will be the dream subject of a Pigouvian system and change my recipe to use 50 grams of sugar instead of my normal portion of 100 grams. First of all, cut out the apple cores and grate the apples. Mix it with the sugar, the cinnamon and the raisins. Melt the butter, then lay out the first phyllo sheet on a kitchen towel. Brush it with the melted butter. Lay out the next sheet on top and again brush it with the butter. Repeat this until the final sheet. Then butter this one and sprinkle it with breadcrumbs. This will soak up the juices from the apples. Squeeze out the grated apple mix and spread it on the top phyllo sheet. Try to avoid putting any on the edges. Preheat the oven at 200 degrees. Roll up the pastry and tuck in the ends. Put some baking paper in a tray and put the strudel in. Okay, so our hypothetical sugar tax affected the amount of sugar I put in the strudel. But will it have the same desired impact on society as a whole? Well, let's see. Evidence shows that vice taxes such as tobacco and alcohol taxes do reduce consumption. This typically works because the cost of the tax is passed on to consumers and the increased prices lessen demand. So we should rejoice, right? Well, there are a few potential glitches. The most obvious one is that we don't know how much the correct rate of tax should be to eliminate externalities, but there are some less obvious problems. First, when the price of sugary drinks go up, it doesn't happen in isolation. It's a bit naive to assume that consumers can flock to alternative non-sugary products and this won't affect the price of these other things. So potentially, the price of less sugary products will also increase. Second, sugar-free products are considered the healthy alternative and as such are sold more expensively. It is unlikely that businesses will price their bad product above their good product. And if healthy alternatives remain more expensive, why should any sugar aficionado switch to the non-sugary version? Third, the poor consume more of the unhealthy sugary drinks. Between 2006 and 2014, the price of soft drinks increased by around 26%. At the same time, demand among the poorest for soft drinks dropped by around 10%. This sounds great, but the problem is that the same people switched to buying 14% more cakes and confectionaries, despite the fact that they have become 40% more expensive. Fourth, taxing a specific product generates illicit markets. Fighting these illicit markets triggers large enforcement costs. The HMRC estimates that it costs more than £2 billion a year to combat tobacco smuggling, and there's still a black market for cigarettes. Unlike tobacco, there's nothing wrong with moderate consumption of sugar. Of course, most people would feel appalled if obese people were charged extra at hospitals, for example. But the sugar tax is passed on to everyone who buys sugary drinks, including those who are not obese. It is very difficult to predict in advance how consumption and production patterns will change after the introduction of the sugar tax. The case of Denmark should be a stark reminder of unintended consequences. A tax on fat was introduced in Denmark in 2011 in order to reduce consumption and improve public health. The tax led to inflation, cross-border shopping, job losses, huge administrative costs, and only a non-significant reduction in the consumption of saturated fat. Unsurprisingly, the tax was abolished in 2013. Reducing obesity and improving public health is a laudable undertaking. But we should also be aware of the unintended consequences of a sugar excise duty that's going to be introduced in the UK in 2018. Moreover, we should also look into other solutions, such as education and physical exercise. Right, our strudel should be ready now. Take it out of the oven, wait until it cools down, sprinkle it with some caster sugar, and serve it sliced. Hope you'll enjoy your strudel, I'm sure I will, and stay tuned for more chopping board economics.